We're rolling? Rolling! All right, 80.2. It's been brought up that there is an unbalanced, in art in general and in this very studio, more naked women than naked guys in the works. And I just took an informal census, and I found 12 naked women and 6 naked guys among your works. Plus, there's a 7th naked guy who's out on loan. So, what's the deal? Why more woo-woos than wee-wees?
Yeah, I never really thought about it.
I think so.
Well, my standard argument for my choice of subject matter is that an artist expresses his own interests. So I don't have a quota system on what I should or shouldn't paint. And if I had ideas that were to be expressed by males, then I would have been painting males, more males. So okay. The fact that I do any nude males at all, though, shows that I'm fairly eclectic in my productivity.
Well, do you find that you have try to convey a spiritual message with your paintings, right?
Right.
Do you find that women are better conveyors of spirituality?
Well, okay. I have not expressed enough spiritual paintings in my life. So a lot of these paintings are just nudes. And I don't think there's any difference in the genders and the sexes in their ability to express. But just by sheer luck, I wound up with more female nudes. And it's okay for an artist to paint things that are meaningless. So in other words, if you want to be a spiritual artist and express spiritual ideas, that's great. But there's nothing wrong with expressing something that's just pure beauty.
Okay. All right, let's move on to, you had a point of view about climate change and evolution.
Well, this is a larger issue of people say that there's a reason that a religious person shouldn't believe in evolution. I've never thought that in my life. There's two explanations there. The first is that I don't know why God wouldn't the same God that makes physics work would surely be able to make humans develop through evolution. In other words, why couldn't God use natural law to the same way he uses everything else?
That's a very Newtonian point of view. Isaac Newton thought he was doing God's work and figuring out the universe. And he actually spent more time trying to decode the Bible than he spent on math and physics.
Right. The other thing is that there are people that argue that we keep finding rational reasons, rational scientific explanations for how things work. And that the more you find out that there is a way to explain things, the less need there is for a God to be the explanation. And my argument has always been this. If you did lots and lots and lots of research and you found out that there was a God, that through doing the science and the experiments, no matter how hard you tried, there was just no explanation, it had to be magic, then there would be evidence of a God. And if there was evidence of a God, then you would lose your free will. Because then you'd be doing everything you could to please that God, not because you thought it was the best thing to do from your own observation and wisdom. And wait, I'm not finished. And it seems to me, therefore, that God would not create a world where if you got sufficiently advanced, you would then see, you'd find out that there was no evolution. Like, he fools you completely on every experiment. No matter how far or deep your science gets, it never comes up against magic. It always has an explanation. Well, why would God make a world that was completely convincing, but then have this little thing where you'd have to say, nah, that was magic?
I think that's a huge point there's a kind of a controversy about whether we could tell whether we live in a simulated world, because when you look at computer games and everything else that is CG, it becomes apparent that computer-generated worlds will become more and more realistic, which makes people wonder, well, how, when they become ultimately realistic, how will we be able to tell whether we're in a simulation that's been built or whether we're in the natural world that we think we've been living in? And maybe we're living in a simulation right now, and we just can't tell because it's so good. But the deal is, it may not even matter, because any decent simulation isn't going to give away the game by having these glitches. So you may not ever be able to tell, and it may not make any difference. Also, here's a plug for The Good Place, which is a sitcom, I think, on NBC, that has been exploring the issue of free will when you know there's a God all season.
Really?
It's a great frickin' sitcom. It's written by awesome people like Megan Amram and Joe Mandy. And
what are some of their issues that come up? Can you think of any?
Well, sorry to spoil one of the themes of the season, but
spoiler alert.
All right, the sitcom begins with 4 bad people who have been sentenced to hell and have managed to, through what appears to be a series of mistakes, manage to avoid hell. And now that we're in season 2 or maybe even season 3, they become better people, but their betterness doesn't count in the rules of getting into heaven or hell, because now that they know there's a heaven, then they're just going to try to get into it, and that being good just to try to get into heaven, according to the rules of God in this sitcom, disqualifies you.
Well, that's the
point you just made.
Yeah, that's why God doesn't come. That's why God doesn't reveal himself to atheists.
Yeah, but it's crazy that the point you made is the theme of this whole season of this frickin' NBC sitcom, which is...
I'll have to watch it, but...
it's really good.
Yeah.
Not because it explores these... it's not good because it's philosophical. It's nice that it's philosophical, but it's good because it's just an entertaining show.
Well, I'll actually give you an answer to one of those. When I was back in the 70s, before they had these computer simulations, I took philosophy in college, and they called it the mad scientist theory. So what it was, how do you know that you're not in a basement somewhere and a mad scientist has attached electrodes up to your brain and you only think this stuff is happening? How do you prove that you exist? And one of the answers was, and this is not a show on philosophies, fortunately, because I can't go much further than this, but one of the answers is you can't doubt that you doubt. So in other words, what you try to do is you try to find contradictions in the matrix, things that you. So in other words, if
You look for glitches.
the argument is you would have to doubt everything. And so you try to find something that couldn't be created by the matrix that you could think of. And one of them is, so in other words, you could go through the whole of your life saying, I doubt you exist. I doubt this exists. I doubt this painting exists. Everything is being fed to me, every image, every sound, by electrodes. But there are logical contradictions inside your head, like I can't doubt that I'm doubting.
Yeah, I mean, I think a better argument is statistical, that given the extreme consistency and fine-grainedness, the level of detail of the world, that that argues in favor of existence. Also, that's not the best argument. I had a better argument. I forget what it is. If you were a god and you were making a simulated world, the best way to make sure that it's logically consistent is to start the world up thousands of years in the past and let it run according to the natural rules for thousands of years. And over thousands of years, any contradictions would tend to get squeezed out.
Right, so you're using evolution.
Yeah,
And
so
by
you would
the time
use natural processes.
By the time evolution, yeah, it would look like it had been on its own. Right. There's also, but this actually goes against what's known as the fine-tuning argument for God's existence. Do you know that argument?
I know it in physics, but maybe not about God.
Well, this relates a lot to physics, so you'll probably have something valuable to contribute. Apparently, the odds against human life being able to exist on this planet are infinitesimal, because the planet has to be exactly the right distance from the sun. It has to have a planet the size of Jupiter that attracts all the comets.
It sucks all the junk out of the
Yeah.
solar system so they don't crash into Earth.
It has to have just the right kinds of elements. It has to be have the right amount of materials in it so that the life can be formed. So from what I hear, it's the strongest argument when given to scientists.
I just read a book on this.
Trillions to one.
Right. Well,
All right.
I just read a book that on exoplanets, which are planets orbiting other stars.
Okay.
And 20 years ago, we couldn't find any of them because we didn't have powerful enough technology. Now we found hundreds of them. And it turns out that, yeah, the Earth's configuration is pretty rare. That most of the time you don't get a planet with a rocky planet. You can't have a gas planet that supports life as far as we know, because you need land to either support oceans or for living beings to stand on. You just can't. It's hard for life to evolve in a big swirling ball of gas. And it turns out that most of the time you don't get. There's a temperate region around every star, an area in which water can be liquid, basically. And most of the time you don't get a decent planet in that temperate region, a usable planet. And so, I don't know, the odds might be trillions to one, but the argument against that is that our solar system, which is average in a lot of ways, has 10 to the 11th stars. And there are roughly 10 to the 11th solar systems in the universe. So you're looking at 10 to the 22nd stars. A trillion is 10 to the 12th. So if life, or if a decent planet was a 1 in a trillion phenomenon, you'd still have 10 to the 10th candidates for decent planets, which is 10 to the 10th is 10 billion candidates for decent planets in the universe.
I may have said it wrong. It's not 1 trillion to 1. It's a comparable number. It's something like 100 zeros after 1 and odds against these things happening.
There's a thing, if you're interested in this stuff, you can look at the Drake equation, which attempts to mathematicize the odds of human level life evolving on any given planet.
I actually, but I'm going to tie that up with the God thing. And that is, the funny thing is that it contradicts the basic argument that God would not let himself be revealed through science, because that would give away the game. Because it may be that we've reached a point where science does say, hey, wait a minute, we can't explain this.
Well, but I mean, the way to figure it out is to actually get out there or run decent enough simulations. I'd say that 1 trillion to 1 is probably, that overstates the rarity.
Well, I don't know the number,
but it makes sense that it could be 1 million to 1, it could be 10 million to 1, it could be 20,000 to 1. And the deal also, almost at least half the stars in the universe are thought to have one or more planets. It doesn't make any, the way suns and the way solar systems form out of gas condensing into these bodies, it would be really, it's much less likely that you'd have a sun minus any planets at all. So you probably have more planets than you have suns, and you have 10,000 trillion stars. So odds are, you may only get, human level life on one star in 150,000. But that's still a lot of frickin'.
And the other logical argument is, well, why couldn't God put life on more than one planet? If it wouldn't mean there was no God. Then the other question that biologists have is how we went from an inert, lifeless mass of basically carbon and hydrogen and a few other elements to creating life that also had the ability to reproduce itself. So that first self-reproducing cell had to have a lot of different structures in it that could contribute to creating life and reproducing itself. And where did they come from?
Well, I think evolutionary biologists, if that's your field and you want to do original research, you're going to look for a step in the chain that hasn't been sufficiently researched yet. And I assume that I've read, about how the first cells may have formed. And I assume that any weak links are getting poked at by people who specialize in
We
that.
hope so. I mean, for me, it's very easy to believe in evolution because in millions or billions of life began what? The planet is
4.5
billion.
4.5 billion years old.
Okay, so and then life is said to have begun a couple billion years later, or
Maybe a billion, or maybe even less than a billion. But it didn't do much for a long. It was pretty simple for a long time.
But the point is that from the time of the first mammal to now, to modern humans, there have been so many generations that it's very easy to believe that we could go from a small monkey-like creature all the way up to a human. I mean, it really is easy to believe because there were so many generations.
Yeah.
And I mean, the line from here to God knows where of people and hominids and things that were mammals goes so far back that if they just had minor changes every, 10,000, 30,000 years, there would still be enough time.
Yeah, well, the exciting part of evolution, I think, takes place over less than 1 billion years. Where you start getting multicellular organisms and, plants and animals, I think. All that took place during the past 800 million years or so. Mm-hmm. But that's still, a human generation is 20 years. But
right,
a generation
they died pretty young.
But a generation for a simpler organism like an amoeba or I don't know what's a
paramecium.
A flatworm. I don't know. They're you can have many generations within a single year. So you're looking across 800 million years. You're looking at the more than 1 billion generations of things engaging in sexual reproduction.
Let me ask you a question, because I've recently become fascinated by this part of evolution, and I don't know if you have an opinion about this.
Okay.
But I just want to preface this. When I was younger, when Rick and I are the information that I'm about to share is new enough that it was not known when Rick and I were young. And that is that at one time there were 4 different hominids living on the earth. There was Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and what is commonly referred to as the Hobbit people in Indonesia. So 4 completely distinct species of hominid lived at the same time. Oh, and the Denisovans, that's 5. All right? Some Asians have Denisovan blood. All Europeans have Neanderthal. No Africans have Denisovan or Neanderthal. And the Hobbit people lived up until around 18,000 years ago.
Well, I heard at Thanksgiving dinner, somebody was telling me that I think if you do 23andMe,
they'll track that, they'll find the Neanderthal.
Well, they'll tell you what percent or how much Neanderthal you have.
Yeah.
Because certain human Homo sapien populations were doing more Neanderthal banging than other populations, depending on, where. So, yeah, that's crazy stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, it, to me, it actually answers a lot of weird behavior that humans exhibit now, that we at one time had to duke it out with 4 other species to survive. We probably fought with them. The interbreeding was possibly rape. I doubt if it was very romantic.
Well, I've heard.
And frankly, in my life, it's not that romantic now.
Okay.
But that's a little personal. Maybe I shouldn't have brought that up.
I've read that Neanderthals may have been smarter than humans, but humans won because we're more violent.
No, actually, I know the answer to this. All right? For our viewers, I actually know the answer to this, at least what the best science says, most modern science. The theory is that Neanderthal was stronger, much stronger, but it was built for winter. And what that means is that it was very, very resistant to cold, but it was short and stocky and not very agile. And its brain was actually the same size as ours, and size of brain matters, they find. There's a relation between size of brain and IQ today. And
yeah, but now, because then, women have smaller brains than men.
Well, see, so you prove my point.
No,
but what I was going to say is that Neanderthal, little political incorrectness there. Neanderthal had a large brain, but it was stocky, and the problem was that it couldn't when the climate went from snowy wooded forests to hot pastures, savannas, yeah. Well, they're not really savannas in Europe, but they're wide expanses. The animals,
Savannah's their stripper name.
the animals could see Neanderthal coming. He couldn't surprise them. Whereas the Homo sapien could run the animal down because he was far more agile.
Okay.
That's all I got to say. Do you want a new subject? Or do you
Well, no,
you
because
have
we
to
were
react on
we were
it?
going to tie that to climate change, because
All right,
the
go
climate
ahead.
change report, the government's climate change report was, if you're going to drop a report that you don't want people to read, or news, if you're the government and you want to release news that you don't want people to pay attention to, you do it at the close of business on Friday, and then it gets lost in the weekend. And if you really don't want people to notice what's going on, you do it on the Friday after Thanksgiving when it's Black Friday, everybody's shopping. And it doesn't work as well anymore because social media amplifies anything. But apparently my wife tells me that when Nick Lachey got divorced from Jessica Simpson, they announced it on Black Friday because they didn't want people to pay much attention to it. And she told me that there should be a celebrity divorce being announced this weekend, but I don't know. But anyway, this climate change report was dropped right when the Trump administration didn't want people to notice it, because it has a lot of bad things to say about climate change, that it's going to reduce our GDP or GNP by 10% by the year 2100, that it's going to throw a wrench into our economy.
Is that all you got?
Well, I've got another thing, which is that people don't make this argument much. Maybe people do, and I just haven't noticed, but there's more money to be made in believing in climate change than there is in fighting it. There's more money to be made in wind power and solar panels and reduced carbon emissions, this and that, than there is in old tech like coal. And it won't be changing human behavior much, because humans have a limited capacity to be altruistic. It's going to be market forces that fix climate change.
I kind of agree with you. And I would also say that there's more grant money available if you're a scientist that is promoting climate change than if you're a climate change denier. They've proven that you'll get more grants. So a lot of scientists are committing career suicide if they say maybe we don't have to worry about climate change.
Well, let's look at the statistics. The statistic is that
Don't give me that 97% believe in global warming. That is such a crock of shit.
Well, I think it's a crock of shit the other way, because that 3% who don't believe in climate change among scientists are scientists who don't work in the field. When you get into the field of meteorology and climate science, it's got to be well over 99.5%.
Okay, that statistic, 97%, was from a study that asked a very vague question. I don't remember the precise question, and it also asked all scientists, people that are agronomists, anthropologists.
Yeah, so it's
It's a bad study, but every liberal I know knows that number. Knows the 97%. So if you want it, we could research that, but that is a weird study. And as far as, let me put it this way. When I first heard that, I knew you were going to bring this up.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, let me get this straight. It's going to cost us billions of dollars by the year 2100? that's of no importance whatsoever. We're probably going
Why?
to
'Cause
lose that on postage stamps. I mean, when I heard that, I thought there's got to be something more to this report. But I'm going to give you guys a general rule.
Well, you said the report is 1,600 pages long.
Yeah.
So yeah, there has to be more
I
to it
hope
than
so,
that.
because I don't give a flying fuck about anything that happens at the year 2100. Because number one, there's no human beings alive today that can tell me anything about the weather in the year 2100. I don't believe it. They can't even tell me what the weather is going to be like next year. They couldn't even predict these hurricanes. So they're going to tell us what the weather's going to be like.
What do you mean they couldn't predict these
72, what, in 88, in 82 years? In 82 years?
81 years, 2 months.
They're going to know what the weather's going to be like in 81 years and 2 months?
No, they won't know what the weather is like. They will know what the climate might be like.
Yeah,
and actually, I read the person who wrote the report was interviewed, and she said, well, they've been calling this the worst case scenario. And she says, that's bullshit, that we actually ran 6 different scenarios from that could be roughly characterized as going from best case to worst case. So no, they're not saying it's going to be this. They're saying it could be anywhere along this range of possible future climates.
All right. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I do know one.
Oh, well, wait, let me talk about that real quickly.
Wait.
Let me just say this, that what's bullshit, at least according to Twitter, and I agree with Twitter on this. I agree with Twitter on most stuff, unfortunately. It's bullshit to put non-scientist climate change deniers on these news channels just for controversy, like Rick Santorum, who is kind of a frickin' knucklehead and is not a scientist. And so why should we have to listen to and get pissed off by Rick Santorum's dumb opinions about climate change? The news channels, if they really wanted to do their job, they would put scientists who are schooled in this on and have them argue about different aspects. I'm sure you could find among the people, among climate scientists, people who have a whole wide range of opinions about what's happening with the climate.
Well, I can answer that. The LA Times has announced a policy a few years ago that they will not put any articles in it that deny climate change because they feel it's immoral. So there's a blackout on climate change denying scientists. And by the way, look, I'm going to give people something to think about, because this I know. The scientists that believe in catastrophic climate change have basically said, look, the thing you really have to worry about is the seas rising and our coastal cities getting overwhelmed with water. That's the big bad thing that will result.
Well, I'd say there's other big bad things.
There
Well,
would be, but the specter of our cities on the coast being flooded, Manhattan being 6 foot in water and this and that, that's the most dramatic result of everything goes wrong. But the problem with all their best theorizing, and I'm just repeating them, you don't have to be a scientist to repeat scientists. The problem is that in the next, say, I believe it was 60 years, they don't know if the sea is going to rise, assuming it will, 1 foot or 6 feet. So the point is, if it rises 1 foot, then San Bernardino will be closer to the ocean. You know, in other words, if it rises 1 foot, then we'll have certain problems along the coasts. Miami will have a problem. If it rises,
New York City.
A little bit, not as much as you might think. We lose Venice, Italy. If it rises 6 feet, we lose the state of Florida and certain other places. weirdly, they say the climate will be better to grow food in places like Canada and Greenland, but worse in places like the Central Valley of California. So my point is, there's just too much uncertainty. If even listening to these scientists, if I don't know whether I'm going to lose a few coastal cities or the entire state of Florida and other equally low territories, then I can't make my decision. And I'd rather not destroy the world's economy to save a few coastal cities.
I would argue,
not worth it.
no, what it is, it's economic opportunity. Whether it's 1 foot or 6 feet, there's hundreds of billions of dollars of business to be done, of money to be made by companies who develop systems to help coastal cities survive. Okay.
Last question. You're an expert on IQ.
Okay. But I'm just saying, like a dike company, somebody that develops super high-tech seawalls that most of the time they're down, and then when a storm surge comes in, they swing up and they save New York City, they save Florida, they pump out and they save New Orleans. People would pay $1 gazillion to have effective systems that do that.
You say a report came out on Iraq.
Yeah, but hold on. Lance was asking me about IQ real quick.
I had an IQ question. It turns out that over the level of 130, men are 1.8 times more likely to have an IQ over 130 than women.
Supposedly there are more outliers among men than women.
And that's why men excel at physics.
Maybe, or it may be that men are just put together cheaper, and you get. I think the president of Harvard had to quit because he said there are more male outliers than female outliers. So it's a tricky area, but it's mostly because there's less quality control genetically in guys than in women. So you might have more guys break in the direction of being good at physics and being terrible at everything else in their lives. So yeah, that might be a thing.
Well, it turns out that physics departments are now favoring less qualified women. They're actually hiring more women with lower qualifications in order to be politically correct.
Yeah, but you have to decide what...
The Democrats are ruining physics.
Nah, because, physics has ruined itself with string theory. It's wasted 20, 30 years on string theory. Let's get to one more thing quickly. How much do you think the Iraq War cost every single American?
I know that the Iraq War may have cost, $12 trillion or something like that?
No, $2 trillion.
$2 trillion, I'm sorry.
That works out to $6,000 on average for every single American.
I'll pay.
It was worth $6,000?
Absolutely.
Per person.
Yeah.
Enough to buy every person in America a decent used car.
I'll pay the $6,000 to get rid of Saddam Hussein.
That's crazy. Okay, that's crazy. How much time do we got? 1 minute. All right, we'll go back to IQ then for a second. Who knows what women may bring to physics? Character research, physics with more women in it may be more effective. It may be different from male-dominated physics gave us the atomic bomb.
They're hiring women with fewer citations, so women with fewer less important work. In other words,
yeah, but there was a bunch of important work done in string theory over the past 30 years. String theory may have taken physics down a rabbit hole that will produce very little actual usable physics. The physics done by women may turn out to be more effective, or co-ed physics may turn out to be. We done? 10 seconds. Subscribe to this thing. We're working on our Patreon thing. I'm lazy, but we'll get it built, and then you can give us money for awesome stuff.
What's Patreon?
It's where you kick us $5, and like maybe we'll Lance will do a drawing for you, or well, what's that?
What's the website?
I don't know, but anyway, subscribe to Lance versus Rick. All right. Thanks,
Good.
everybody.
All right.